Real growth, and the key word here is real, and what we mean by real is growth that is long-term, growth that is sustainable, and growth that is not QSQT. Anyone knows what QSQT is from a growth perspective? Quarter se quarter tak. So we are actually talking about long-term sustainable growth, and what can we do to kind of drive that? There's obviously a lot of gloom and doom everywhere around us, right? I think the business papers are overdoing it, frankly. But if you read any of the reports of the analysts, and I happen to read a few recently, Nomura says the elephant has lost its stamina, commenting about India. India 2019, Nomura says we've lost our stamina. Goldman Sachs has done a major analysis about the slowdown, and they're saying over 50% of the reason is because consumption has slowed down, and almost a third of it is because of the auto sector, and that's really kind of pulling things down. One reads about job losses, one reads about layoffs, one reads about volumes not growing, one reads about stock market not doing too well, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously there's lots of doom and gloom around us. But one has to look at the other side of the story, and those of us who work in multinational organizations realize that we still remain the beacon of hope for our headquarters. India is by far the fastest growing market in most sectors. We have still so much headroom to grow. We are still a young demographic. The digital economy is just about kicking off in India. So if you look at the positives, they actually far outweigh the negatives. However, there's obviously a bit of an issue right now, and there is a bit of a slowdown. So assuming things change, there's been a lot of announcement of late, obviously in terms of stimulus, and assuming things pick up, and again, the experts say it's going to take 2 quarters, 3 quarters, or whatever. But whenever things pick up and whenever things come back on track, are we going to go back and say now it's all hunky-dory and it's all going to be very fine, especially if you're running a traditional business? I'm not very sure. Because even when things were not so bad 3-4 years ago, a lot of traditional businesses started facing a lot of challenges to kind of grow, started facing a lot of headwinds to grow. And why is that? If you actually look at over the last 10, 15 years, the age-old formula of growing one's business by either taking products into new markets or just incrementally adding value to a certain product or whatever else hasn't really worked the way it worked 20 years ago. So incrementalism is not working anymore. Just doing the same thing better, bringing in value engineering, driving more profit, or hoping to drive more profit is not really yielding results as it used to before. Hence, the rules of the game have somewhere changed. And what we're going to talk about in the next 10 odd minutes is, therefore, what should be the new rules. So just to look at some of the challenges traditional businesses are facing. Obviously, the barriers to entry are fast disappearing. There are lots of new players who are emerging, defining categories, completely new rules. And even the disruptors, the so-called disruptors who came into our industry, digital companies, are themselves getting disrupted. And then there are challenges which stakeholders are raising, employees are raising, customers are raising, challenges around transparency of corporate culture. And a lot of environmentally conscious citizens, very rightly, are even sometimes challenging the license to operate. So despite all of this, we still believe there is growth to be found. Despite the gloom and doom, despite all the challenges, there is growth to be found. Look at some examples closer home, what Domino's did to actually go and try and find growth in a very uncomfortable place, actually tying up with IRCTC, going and delivering pizzas to people who are traveling by train. Look at some brands which are going directly to the customer, trying to find new channels to reach out to the customers. So there are examples, even closer home, of brands who are trying to kind of buck the trend and all of that. And what happens when growth is lacking? And this data is from Spencer Stuart's global study, 2018. The number of CMOs who got reshuffled in 2018 was like a record high. And in most cases, they're the ones who kind of take the blame. I just want to spend a minute here, and in my own observation, I think somewhere the role of a CMO, or the way it's kind of evolved in the last few years, we actually find in many cases CMOs over-index their time on developing communications and looking at advertising, while actually their role perhaps is to grow the business. And some companies just change the title from a CMO to a CGO, and they think that's going to help grow the business, but it's not enough. We really think that as CMOs, growth really needs to be on top of the agenda. Otherwise, there could be this whole concept of a CMO getting irrelevant. So CMO is not equal to just advertising. So therefore, at WPP, we decided to, work with some of our partners and try and create a new growth architecture to actually help our key clients, the CMOs, find their rightful place in the organization and actually help organizations grow. So I'll just spend a minute on what we've created recently. We've co-funded an institute called IRG. IRG stands for the Institute for Real Growth. And apart from WPP and Kantar, we have Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, the New York State University, Syed Business School from Oxford, and Spencer Stuart, who are all partners and who've co-funded this institute. What we've done over the last 6 to 8 months is we've conducted a research across 15 markets with about 600 to 800 C-suite executives to actually find out what really are the key levers of growth. And we also did a quantitative survey, which was online, over 6,000 participants, to kind of corroborate some of this. We analyzed a lot of data. We also had LinkedIn as a partner and so on and so forth. So what actually came out of this study, 2 kinds of outputs, which I'm going to share. One is, the broad themes are all put together or clustered together into 7 pillars of growth or 7 real, levers or drivers of growth in the new world. So that's something which I'll share. What also came out as a byproduct of this study is what really are the differentiators between underperformers and overperformers. So what separates the men from the boys, so to speak, across some of these 7 levers. So I'll quickly walk you through all of this and then we'll close the session. So the first building block is what we call abundant markets. So what does abundant markets mean? In the olden days, we used to always talk about market share. Growth is all about market share. The more market share you get, the more you're going to grow. This is an example of a certain brand which, when it looked at its, this is from the US, when it looked at its market share from Nielsen, it was very happy, 27% market share. The same brand as defined by Amazon, its market share was just 11%. And why is that? Because if it's, just to give you an example, a shampoo brand, Nielsen probably is giving it a market share among shampoos, but Amazon is probably giving it a market share amongst a wider set of products and services, which can probably give you the same benefit as a shampoo. And then you go down to a even more specialist website like a Kickstarter.com, and the market share actually came down to 3%. Now imagine if you're a brand manager or a product manager or a marketing officer of an automobile brand, which you think has a 60% market share in the country. Imagine driving to work every day thinking I have a 60% share of the country, because you're only used to seeing your market share amongst other automobile manufacturers. But imagine if the consideration set of competition went into any form of transport or anything that satisfies the need of a person going from A to B, the market share may actually come down from 60% to 6%. So imagine the outlook and the energy and the paranoia that can strike if you just redefine your consideration set for marketing, which actually helps you work harder, strive harder, and get to the top and stay relevant. So this is again a data point which shows between the overperformers and underperformers, 85% of the overperformers actually expand their market definition when they look at their products compared to only 33 of the underperformers. And like I said earlier, just focusing on market share is what the underperformers seem to just focus on, while the others, take a slightly broader view. Okay, so that was the first one. The second pillar is all about multiple models. So what does multiple models mean? Again, the earlier way of looking at it is every organization, corporate, typically operates in a certain zone, a certain space. They have ROI models which have been time tested over the years. And if there's any idea that doesn't fit into an ROI model, in most cases it kind of gets dropped or gets ejected. So through our study, we realized that the overperformers, or the ones who are doing really well, are the ones who actually run multiple models, multiple business models within the organization, and they could be at various stages of evolution. Some could be in an alpha state, some could be in a beta state. So just by over-focusing on your core business, sometimes you're missing out on the next big thing. And the difference is quite stark. 66% of the companies that are doing really well globally are actually simultaneously running multiple models. And there are examples of organizations and brands that we know who've done this and who've managed to kind of go into different categories, different channels or whatever else, because they've tried out new things simultaneously. The third pillar is all about experiences, evolving experiences. And again, the earlier principle was growth is all about customer satisfaction. As long as we have satisfied customers, it's enough. But this is what the new age leaders are saying. It's not just about having customers who are satisfied, but actually ensuring that you're constantly evolving the customer's experience. I'm sure all of us are spoiled because of the number of times we use an Amazon or an Uber or or a Netflix kind of apps, which are so easy, which understand us, so easy to navigate. We expect the same experience when we're dealing with the traditional brands, and sometimes it just isn't there. So again, yeah, so that's a key finding from the study. I'm just zipping through the end because I'm conscious of time. The fourth pillar is around culture. Again, traditional belief, we can't change culture. Culture is our DNA. But there are organizations who've come in. What Satya Nadella has done to Microsoft is just super amazing. I mean, a company which is a hardcore software technical company, he's actually changed the whole thing around into being a very, very customer-centric company. And you can read about it in terms of their products and whatever it's done to the organization. Another interesting point around culture is diversity. Diversity of leadership. Diversity of not just talent, but diversity of the people sitting at the very top. And I think this is a great example. Unilever globally has made acquisitions like other corporates, but the difference is they've actually ensured or they've managed to retain the founders of the companies that they've acquired and actually created a founders club. So what Unilever has done very smartly is they're leveraging the founders of the acquisitions as change agents within the organizations. Now, how many companies do this? Very, very few. Most of us are just used to acquiring companies, waiting for the earnout to happen, and then we think we can manage those companies on our own. We don't really harness the power of the company we've acquired, and this is what Unilever has done fantastically well. Now we talk about anticipative organizations, and this data is from LinkedIn. Companies who have done well, who have consistently performed, are the ones where there is constant and open communication across levels, both horizontally as well as vertically. The number of connections, the number of times seniors talk to juniors or their peer groups is 3.5 to 5.5x more times than companies who don't perform. The 6 pillars around being whole-brained, which is obviously not just look at data and analytics, and this is again something which thankfully in the last few months we're beginning to hear corporates, agencies, everybody talk about, data, analytics, technology is all very fine, but finally it's all about insights, it's about creativity, it's about creatively using the data that you have. Again, there are numbers to prove this, the overperformers versus the underperformers, how creatively they use data in addition to technology. Last but not the least, humanized growth. What do we mean by this? Obviously, it was all about profits. It was all about boosting profits earlier. But while obviously there was nothing to differentiate overperformers and underperformers when it came to focus on top-line growth. Everybody believes top-line growth is very important, no difference. But when it came to bottom-line growth or just focus on profits, actually the underperformers are obsessed with profits compared to the overperformers. You see the difference there, 36 versus 25. So while the overperformers are actually quite obsessed about their people, they spend more on people, and hence somewhere they also take a hit on their profits. Not just when I say their people, it's their colleagues and also their communities, like what a brand like Dulux has started with Brazil and other markets. So just to summarize, like a neat little framework that helps you look at what should be the 7 pillars of growth. It's all up there. We also did a quantitative analysis of where are we today, and most leaders admitted that it's not so much humanized growth, but it's more. Most of them are looking at expanding markets. Most of them are looking at trying to build anticipative organizations. But when we ask them about the future, this is where they see their future. They're saying very clearly humanized growth or companies that focus on their people meaning their employees, their communities, their suppliers, their partners, their customers, all of it. That's really the key and perhaps the most important. I want to end with, and this is not a coincidence, but it just so happened that a few weeks after we released the IRG report, there was this massive business roundtable in New York on the 19th of August. Nearly 200 CEOs of US-based companies got together and for the very first time came up with a joint declaration saying exactly what I've said in the box. Shareholder value is no longer everything. That's what they've said. And they actually talk about how important it is to focus more on the long term, focus on people, focus on employees, focus on partners. Everything else will fall in place. I think over the years, the focus has been elsewhere and things have got pretty tough. And again, not a coincidence, but when I was walking through the Delhi airport this morning, for my flight and walked through the bookshop, and I just happened to see the latest Economist lying there on the rack. This is actually the cover story there as well. So everyone's talking about it, maybe better late than never. Again, of course, there are a lot of critics who have come out and said, these are the top 200 CEOs, they've all made it big, they are the biggest companies in the world, they can now sit back and say this. So that's what the critics are saying, but at least better late than never. There is consciousness now, and something is indicating to us that things will perhaps change. Perhaps there's no other choice. If you have to leave behind a planet for future generations, I think that's the way to go. So that's where I'm going to end, to just say that while everything else is fine, I think focusing on humanized growth, focusing on putting people first is what is going to lead to real growth, where I really started the whole thing, and not QSQT or quarter se quarter tak growth. Thank you.